Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today we're going to look at how we are manipulated, either by the government or indeed by the place that we work in, possibly even friends and family, who knows. We are, of course, being manipulated by lots of people. When, you know, a young lady flutters her eyes at you, you might think, oh, I say, I'll do whatever you want. But is it deeper than that? Is there something a bit more nefarious going on? Well, I'm going to talk to a lovely chap called David Charalambous, who is a communication and behavioural expert. He told me that he is also calling out, excuse my French, the bullshit that is going on in the world against you and I. So let's find out how we're being manipulated. David, welcome to the show.
Hello, Richard, and thank you for having me on.
It is a pleasure. Now, we know that we were, well, most of us, I think, and particularly the audience of my channel will know that in the last 3 years, of course, that we have been massively manipulated to do things that perhaps afterwards we may regret having done, or we were sold narratives that were a bit odd and a bit strange, but some of us still went along with it. I don't need to elucidate too clearly about what those were, because I think people are very well aware. Yeah. So let's find out then how we get manipulated and what we can do to protect ourselves from that.
Yes. Well, the last 3 years were, could anyone have predicted the way people would act?
No.
I think no. I think that so effectively it was unbelievable. Okay. And when we look into the human mind, the psyche, human nature, there are parts of it that just really aren't believable. You know, we come to conclusions and we go, oh my God, I can see how it works, but how am I going to show that to someone? So what we need to do is keep an open mind, but a healthy skepticism as well. So I'm going to talk about things that go, oh, wow, but I'll quote plenty of research, and then you can look for yourself. And when you see it in operation, you go, oh my God, because what we're talking about is a hidden world. So if you think about when Oppenheimer and the other guys worked on, you know, atoms, and Einstein, all these things come out with these, well, nothing's real anymore. I mean, everyone would have gone, yeah, right. You know, that's not their experience. But of course, enough things happen. They created enough crazy things that they go, okay, well, there's something to this. So that's the kind of way I would ask to look at this. Because when you see the hidden motives and the hidden agendas, then you understand that if there's a group of people that understand how to manipulate us without our knowledge or our consent, and a lot of the time that we can't even see it, then you understand why people will act in the way they will act in. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and this has been known by a lot of sort of scholars for hundreds of years in some form or another, which is why Voltaire said, if you can convince me of absurdities, I can commit atrocities.
Right.
Okay,
and of course that is going on.
Yes. So if we can put on the TV, and they don't come up and they say, this guy's bad, this guy's good. They show you things where they want you to think the bad guy's bad. So they show you him doing bad things, they create them, or there are bad things, and then the other, and vice versa. So with a good guy, they hide all the bad things that he's doing, and then they have some paid mercenary actors go over, shake hands, give him an, you know, whatever it be. So they're effectively, and you in entertainment, you know, they paint a story, they tell a story, and they can do it. The thing that happened, I would guess 20 to 30 years ago, which made them take a quantum leap, was really one distinction. They stopped listening to what people said, and they started watching what they did. Because a lot of the time, when you ask someone why they've done something, a lot of the time they don't know, but they will very rarely say, I don't know. What they will do is give you some reasonable answer. Yeah.
Right.
So if you ask someone why they took the jab, why they're wearing masks, any of those things, they're not going to say, oh, well, I just want to comply.
No.
Yeah. What they say is whatever the pre-prepared script given
from, I'm saving Granny.
Yeah.
I'm doing this because it's a humanitarian thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm doing it because effectively I've been told by the government to do it, and I don't want to, or I don't want to lose my job, or whatever.
And what happens when you point out that contradiction? Do they smile and go, you're correct?
Probably not.
No, they get
No,
angry and then they attack
they
you.
resent. Yes.
Yeah.
How dare you? How dare
Uh,
you imply that's what it was? I am my own man. I can make my own decisions.
exactly. And this is why Mark Twain found it very difficult. Like that quote when he said, it's easier to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled.
Mm.
Because when I talked to, there was a group of behavior scientists, we were sort of talking about how the manipulation was working, how we could show people. And, we had this agreement. We don't watch the news. Okay, because it's too dangerous to watch a visual because so much is going on. You can't protect all the elements of your mind because you get distracted. And that's why magic works very well. They distract you and then they do the trick. But if you read the news, it's much easier to stay objective.
Right.
And so we
Which is
won't watch the news.
yes.
So
But, well, I don't have a television now.
Yeah.
I got rid of my television because, fortunately, and I say this, I've been making videos for so long, and even as a young man, I was manipulating. I was using Super 8 and things, and how when you frame something here, it can look lovely, but either side of the frame can be a completely different story.
Exactly.
And I know that from my dad, who bought. He bought in Spain a little holiday caravan thing, and they said it was all going to look lovely, and it did look lovely over there. But the bit that he actually bought that they didn't show in the photos was a complete mess. It was a disaster for him.
Exactly. So what you've got is that they have misrepresented what they were selling. So there was no fairness in that agreement. And this is the thing. Fairness has to be present. So, and it's not. And there's con men in all institutions now, but a lot of them don't see themselves as con men. Okay.
Right.
Very easy to deceive ourselves. There are people that know they're con men, right? So there's a group of people that after this should spend the rest of their lives in prison. There's a bunch of people where the public will have to decide. And then there's a huge gray area, and if you are a doctor or an expert in your field, then I think you should be reading the small print. Yeah. But, a grandma sitting at home watching the BBC, I mean, how is she ever going to know? She's been taught her whole life that, we trust the experts. And
yes.
In a lot of ways, it's wise to trust someone with in-depth knowledge. But if they don't have your interests at heart, or if they're more concerned with making money, so this is where it becomes really important. So when you see someone do something, you don't know what's driving them to do it. Are they doing it because they've got a big ego and they want to earn money, or are they doing it because they love their patients? If you ask them, you're not going to get, oh, I'm doing it because I want loads of money. So asking them isn't really the best way of eliciting the information. To watch them is when you'll get it. And this is when you can ask some really good questions that will put people into tough spots where they'll have to face up to why they're really doing something. That makes sense?
No, that absolutely. Well, I mean, if I just look at myself, for example, here am I sitting on YouTube pontificating and trying to sort of work out what is the best for all of us, and I'm doing it clearly because I want to do it, but I am aware that people are listening to me because they say me and they meet me at events and stuff and say, oh, I took that bit of advice or I did that. And then I think to myself, golly, I am actually very responsible here because I have to be very careful that I'm not directing people to do things. And I do from time to time, when I remember, say, look, you've got to do your own due diligence on this. This is only my opinion. And I'm still trying to work it all out.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be manipulative, but I want to share the information that I've learnt. But that information may not be good information.
Exactly.
And how do you know?
And that's where, say, keep opinions, but remain skeptical of them. And if we see, one of the things I've been doing recently, because I just finished another research project a few months ago, and it allowed me to see, oh my God, some things in my own mind that weren't how I would like them to be. So then I got a team and they helped me sort of resolve some belief systems and stuff like that. But if you can't see something, you can't do anything about it. So There's a famous quote that says, people don't know, but they don't know that they don't know. Yes. So one of my main things of the project was, we started the Reaching People, to create spaces where people could have good conversations. Now, I said, it's not up to me to convince that my side is right. So I'm pretty clear on what my opinions are around vaccinations and masks, and masks absolutely pointless, all that stuff. But if I say, oh, I'm going to convince someone that they're bad, but what if I'm wrong? And I don't think I am wrong on those, but if we create a space where people can get to the truth and they communicate well, then you don't have to worry about what's truth, because then people then begin, then a dialogue begins. That makes sense. But we haven't had a dialogue. We've been, anyone that said anything against it was censored and hidden. So, and this is one of the most problematic things with censorship. The way we work, we make decisions based on the available information, not on the information, the available information. So if I can't see what I need to see, I often won't go looking. And this was shown. So there was one medical study where they said in the surrounding area in the US, say in the state, death rates from the specific operation would change up to 300% from hospital to hospital. Would you like to pay $50 to find out which is the safest hospital? How many people said yes?
Well, I imagine most of them would want to see the safest hospital.
8%.
Oh, only 8?
They didn't want to know. And there's so many things like this where what we expect would happen is not what actually happens. And because behavioral science stopped looking at what we said we would do and watched what we actually would do, then they noticed a difference. And so what the corporations and the governments and everything is doing is they are acting on how we would act, not how we say we would act. So then most of it becomes stealth, because we don't a lot of the time act how we think we would act. That makes sense. So I'm always saying, I'm going to be completely tidy. I'm going to get there on time, right? And I never am. So I have to be honest with myself and say, well, obviously, I can continue to deceive myself, as one of those two. But that's why it's so fascinating. And there is a Lao Tzu quote that says, and it's in The Art of War, he says, if you know yourself and you know the enemy, you need not fear 1,000 battles. But if you know yourself but not the enemy, you'll get 1 for 1. But if you neither know yourself nor your enemy, then you will be lambs to the slaughter, in effect.
Right.
That makes sense? So, So what I've been trying to do on this project, and the people that work with me, is not to convince anyone of anything, but show them how they can start to think clearly, how to understand how our minds work, because they don't work how we think. They're not built for truth. They're not built for logic. They're built for safety. We like to think that we're built for logic, but if we are, then how, look at the loads of things we do.
Well, yes, because no, that's very true, isn't it? Because we know certain things are bad for us, and yet we still do them. Yeah.
And you should have the choice to do that.
Yes.
Okay? But a lot of the things that are bad for us that we do, we didn't initially want to do them. We were propagandized and brain and conditioned to enjoy those. Yeah. So I said a quote on one of the podcasts the other day. I said, well, up to 18, you aren't really responsible for your conditioning because it was given to you. You were indoctrinated at school into certain ideologies, ideas, whatever belief system you were given, parents, all these things. Okay, you didn't really have much say in that. But at 18, then you can take back control. And it's easier said than done, of course, but it's that point to know that what you believe and who you are not the same thing. That makes sense. You're much more than what you believe. You're much more than your brain. You're much more than all these things. We can't actually really describe what we are. It's always much more than. But we have much more power than we think we do. But if the people in power can convince us that we have no power, then what we're going to see is that quote, which is, what can I do, said 7 billion people.
Right. That's a very powerful quote, particularly at the moment in which we see tyrannical governments pushing ever more tyrannical policies, and 7 billion people are saying, well, what can I do? Well, hang on, there's 7 billion of you.
Yeah. And that's the power that I don't think a lot of people realize how important this subject is. When you begin to understand the power, because we are under this false sense of security that we can consciously decide everything. But we can't, because I've battled against many of my own beliefs throughout my life, and what they do is it's like there's a metaphor. They talk about the old elephant and the young elephant. I don't know if you've heard it, Richard, but they say,
No,
how do
share
you
it.
control a young elephant? So you tie a rope around its neck and you tie the rope to the tree. They say, how do you contain an old elephant? Well, you just tie the rope around its neck. You don't need to tie it to the tree because it's already worked
It's
out.
already been conditioned.
Exactly. I can't go
Right.
outside these spaces. Now, we don't like to admit that we sabotage ourselves. So we're going to rationalize because we want to look, we don't want to look stupid or silly and all these things. And you get the reverse that some people will constantly say they're stupid when they're not, and these things. But we didn't decide these things. We interpret them a lot of the time to what we were seeing. But when you look at, I mean, here's a study to show. There was one study, it was phenomenal, mind blowing. They had a group of students, I think there was 30 of them, and they gave them an exam and they worked out on a specific subject how well they did the exam. They gave them they said to the teachers, these two children are the top two, so they're ones to really sort of give some confidence to. By the end of the semester, those two children were the top two, but in the exam, they come bottom.
Ah.
Okay. So it was the nurturing, it was the confidence, it was the, you've done really well. Right. So when we're at school, how many no's to yes do we get? How many of us enjoy school? So there's a theory now that a lot of schools, they've made intentionally boring on purpose to show the ones that are going to be able to do a shitty, boring job for the rest of their life. It's basically molding you into a very effective, good worker. Okay. And a lot of schools obviously have a lot of propaganda and all these things, but a lot of teachers are good. But if they're indoctrinated into shitty ideas, which we're seeing now, I mean, I can't imagine the crap that's being taught in school at the moment. I hear bits of it and it's mind blowing. Did you see the towel go up in the background? That was
I did. I just saw the dog. Is it the dog?
Yeah, chocolate lab in the background. My
lovely.
Samantha, she's adorable.
So yeah, so I mean that you're right with the schools, and a lot of people are worried about that. And of course, then they have to face themselves and think, well, I want to take my children out of the school, but I am working, and then all the other parameters of life are arguing against the one thing that I suppose a man and a woman are here on earth to do, is to procreate and bring up the next generation, and then they have all these, I suppose, smaller issues that seem to be bigger than the ability to bring up the child as they want to, and then they give them to strangers with unusual ideas.
Exactly. I mean, school for the most part is daycare for a lot of things, because and it's a lot of people per one nanny, and in an ideal world, you would have a very wise person with very wise ideas, creating a beautiful environment where the kids can learn. But as one of my mentors said, there's too much teaching and not enough learning going on.
Right.
Yeah.
So
there's not that they're learning, is that they've been taught ideologies. And of course, come back to that Voltaire quote. If you can teach them absolute absurd contents, they're going to do stupid things.
Yes.
And this is why it's such a huge gray area, because once you understand these kind of ideas that people can entertain, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of conflict going on in a lot of the freedom groups right now, and it's just to be expected. What happens if you throw 100 chefs in one kitchen?
Yes. They're all going to argue how that pizza's supposed to be made,
exactly,
or the risotto, or whatever it is.
Yeah, so you've got the people that didn't fall for indoctrination. So one, they're going to be sort of a little bit rebel. They're going to be strong-willed. They're going to have opinions, all these things. And then you throw all these guys into the same room, and then you come up with tons of different narratives, which some believe in, some don't. I mean, it's an absolute mess. Okay. So I think a lot of the time, I've been talking to a few people on this, how we can come up and just show what's going on, how we can be a bit more humble. It's not easy, and find a way that we can dance without stepping on each other's toes, because a lot of this is done intentionally. So a lot of the time, someone, if they become very effective, they get thrown under the bus and pretended they're controlled opposition and all these things. And there are controlled opposition, no doubt. But I don't think to the number that we think there is. That makes
No,
sense.
I totally agree there, but because I know that people point to me and say and now I know myself, and nobody's well, if they're controlling me, it's controlled by, certainly not by any money.
Yeah.
I've had no checks through the door saying, Richard, say this, do the other. So it's only, I don't know the quality of the guests and where they're coming from, because I'm so busy, and they come on and they do their thing, and then some people will say, I've had a guest on fairly recently. They said, "Oh, you shouldn't have had him on for this reason, that reason," and but again, I think, well, I'm just offering people a chance to
Yeah.
listen. They can make up their own mind, and it's up to them. And then when the audience are telling me who I should have or who I shouldn't have, I think to myself, wait a minute, you're the ones controlling me if I acquiesce.
Well, this is such an important subject, and that's why it's probably wise and valuable for us to discuss this, because it's the elephant in the room a lot of the time. Because what happens is, in conflict, and let's just take in an office, for instance, so there's no nefarious hidden genders. It's just people trying to earn more money and get more status, things like that, which go on a lot of the time in human nature. So what happens is, if someone has a problem with someone, they don't normally talk to that person. They normally go and talk to one of their friends about that person. So then what you've got is all these parallel conversations going on. And from that point onwards, it's just a disaster. So then what happens, the groups fracture, you've got people talking about other people. But here's the thing we have to understand. It's human nature. Because there was a lady called Jane who presented on one of the seminars I was at, and she was brilliant, and she knew a lot about this. And then when it comes to the time that I had a problem with someone, I felt wanting to go and talk to someone, and then I caught myself and said, no, I need to talk to that person. That makes sense. So once you understand what we naturally would do, you can say, okay, well, what's the conclusion going to be with that? Oh, not great. So then we start looking at that elephant in the room. That makes sense. We start saying, okay, these are just natural problems that arise. Yes, there are nefarious people, there are evil people, there are manipulative people, and all those, and they're the ones that we really need to know about. But because look at this structure and this. So if you're talking to the member of the public, Richard, and you say something about the mask or the jab or whatever that they don't believe and they think you're mad, what do they call you?
Yeah, the conspiracy theorists.
Exactly, straight
like
away. But if you're talking to someone that now has seen through that lie and you say something they don't like, what do they call you? Controlled opposition.
Right.
It's the same thing. If you say something to someone they don't like, a lot of the time, rather than evaluate, and of course there is a lot. That's why I say stay healthily skeptical. Okay, healthily skeptical, not disastrously or angrily skeptical. Just doesn't make sense to me. And then if you look into it deep enough, you can get to a lot of the facts, because one of the biggest manipulation techniques they're using is just the obscuration of the facts. They throw so much crap out there that it's so difficult to find the facts. And there's a book by Cheryl Atkinson that's brilliant. It's called Slanted, and she was I think a CBS reporter for 20 years. And I'm not a big fan of her political beliefs and all those things, but I'm not a big fan of anyone's political beliefs, because I think the whole thing is just this left, right, middle, all that. It just doesn't make sense to me. But she was a brilliant reporter, journalist, and she would say, when I'd interview someone, I would put my beliefs to one side as much as possible. Okay. And I would try and objectively, but that's not what they're doing anymore. And she's showing that that's not the plan anymore. They openly admit now they're supposed to slant the story. But she showed how there was a drug company that had a new, I think it was cholesterol drug or anything. And what they did, they ran a major study where they watched, they gave people the information, and then they watched how they would verify the information. And then what they did was hijack all the places that person could see the truth. So in fact, that person could no longer be informed.
Right. So well, I know that. I mean, I know that from my son when I was trying. I suppose at the beginning this time last year, talking to him as I was aware of certain things, and I wanted to just to sort of get his opinion, and I would say, oh, have you heard of such and such and such and such? He would go to the fact checkers and say, no, Dad, you're wrong. I've just checked it. As
Yes.
quickly as that, you know, as I was talking to him, he was on his phone going, no, that's a false thing. Don't worry about it. You know, you don't have to think about it. And it was like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, isn't it?
You haven't even let that trickle into your thought that could it be a possibility? It's just, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a lie, because I went on to a fact-checking site.
Yeah, I had a guy post a fact check, which is just some lackey sitting in a room somewhere.
Yes.
Against a published medical study that I posted. And by the way, even those are not 100% reliable, because even I think it was it a New England Medical Journal editor come out and said 50% of all research is bullshit.
Right.
But the thing is, once you understand, when you look at something, you've got to look behind the scenes before you know what's caused it. The drivers, the invisible forces are the things, and that's a lot of my work now, is understanding the invisible forces. So if you have a doctor getting 30,000 bonus if he puts COVID on the death cert, that is a pretty strong hidden force. Okay.
Yes.
So if he has a choice to put, say, pneumonia or COVID, he might be able to rationalize, well, there's no difference. The person's dead, but 30,000, I can put my child through university.
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah, and I'm not
Very
saying
easy.
I'm not saying it's right, because it's wrong, and it's completely wrong. And once you step over that line, it's a slippery slope. But
when you do something that the first time, it's difficult, isn't it? And then the second time, it's a bit easier until it becomes routine.
Well, that's what they say. Once your integrity gone, it's easy from there. And that's how, because here's the thing. They know, and by they, I mean all these people that has all the deep knowledge of the behavioral science. When it comes to corrupting the moral compass, they have 4 conditions they can create, and it will corrupt up to 65% of the population's moral compass. Okay, by creating 4 conditions which are strong forces. And you think about that, it makes a mockery of democracy.
Yeah. Well, okay. What would be those 4 conditions?
I was hoping you would ask that. I've got them listed down, but basically one of them is for the greater good.
Right. Yeah, which we've heard recently.
Exactly. So it doesn't have to be true. You just give them the. So when
people fall for it. I mean, they fall. You know, they go, "Oh yeah, well that makes sense. Exactly. I'll take this for the greater good."
The second one is following the rules. The third one is minimize consequences. So somebody else, you know, so you're not responsible. Just do as you're told. Blah, blah, blah.
Doing my job.
And the fourth one is you dehumanize the opponents.
Yeah, and we see that in all wars, of course, all conflicts, but even in just, you know, arguing, and we've seen that racially and all sorts of different things. That is you know, that dehumanizing thing. Yeah, that's what gets me very much when suddenly you hear those comments from people who, I mean, take the Irish problem that we've had in recent times. You know, they both got the same religion, but one is Protestant, one is Catholic, and they would dehumanize each other. And you go, it's not as if you're, you know, talking about completely different type of religion.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's in the, you see, it's crazy. I mean, if you look to, I mean, once you understand the elements to it, and if we transcend that, we go, hang on a minute, we're fighting here, but we're, you know, and it has happened, and it happened. I've mentioned on a few podcasts a story in, do you remember 1914 No Man's Land when they had the football match?
Oh yes, at Christmas time.
Yeah. So 1 minute they're shooting each other because your badge means you're bad and my badge means I'm good, and of course they both feel the same way. Yeah. But the minute they were no longer the badges, the minute there was someone else helping me dig a hole for a lost one, then it's another human being. Yeah. And that's why it's so important. These nouns are so important. And of course, a lot of it, people don't, it's so easy to be hypnotized by it. So when someone goes, if you challenged, right, so you know about Overton's window, I think. So if I quickly mention.
I've heard it, yes. Just remind me, Overton, just for the sake of the audience as well as this little brain in here.
Yeah, so John Overton was a politician, I believe, and he coined a term which has been around since the dawn of time, but he gave it the name, which is there's this window, and inside the window is the acceptable level of debate. You can be really close to the outer parts of the window, but outside of it, you're not allowed to talk about. Okay.
Right.
So what the media does is they condition what's inside the window and what's outside the window. If you try during the lockdown, if you tried to challenge vaccines, that was something you couldn't talk about because blah, blah, blah. So they did such a great job of saying, right, we can talk about this, but you can't talk about that. And if you talk about that, you're a conspiracy theorist, an anti-vaxxer, etc. So once you get given that label, it's so effective because then what the person does is, oh, if they're a conspiracy theorist, they must be the enemy. They're on the other side. So they dismiss everything you say.
Yes.
Until you get beyond those labels, they won't listen to a word. And
no.
The reason that what your son did was so problematic because what the behavioral scientists and the experts on media, public relations, they get into a room, they say, right, when we give someone a fact, what makes it believable? No, it's not the fact itself, it's the surrounding information. So if you take a fact and you put it in 4 different magazines, that's going to be completely different level of believability depending on what magazine it's in. So with the facts around COVID, they said, okay, so the surrounding information, they said, right, we'll put doctors, medical journals, media. So you imagine what they've done is they've plotted out this sort of on a board of all the places that they need to, and then they bring the fact checkers in.
Yeah.
And all these things. So when I spoke to people, what I hear constantly is, all of this surrounding information. So they're saying, oh, well, no way could they do that. There's checks and balances in the system. Oh, all the scientists agree. Okay. And this is where we've got to be very gentle. And there's sort of order you got to do to talk to someone. But effectively, when you've done the first bits, like so they don't see you as crazy, they see you as a person that cares and all these things, you go, well, if Pfizer didn't release the data, how can all the scientists agree?
Yes. Well, exactly. And yes, so you pose a question that they can't answer.
Yeah, it's self-evident. Yeah. But the thing is, if you pose that question ahead of time, they wouldn't attack the idea because they can't. They would attack you. Because what happens is people don't like their belief systems challenged. And that's why I said at the beginning, very importantly to say, a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about on the face of it looks unbelievable. But when I give you the reasons and the studies and whatever, you go, oh my God, well, and a lot of it becomes self-evident when you look at experience. So if we were to talk about and false assumptions become very problematic. So I would say, and I don't think it's too controversial to say that a lot of the scientific community, the ones that knew what was really going on, had a false assumption that all you need to do is show someone the fact and they will change their mind. Okay.
And whether they know that's the real fact or not.
Yeah, but it's not true. And
right.
Even Pierre Corey on his Substack a few weeks ago put out a study that they show that when you present people the facts, in fact, they believe what they believe even more. So there was I think a famous study in the US on gun control. So gun control is very polarized. So they took both ends of the spectrum and they presented, really valid, well-articulated arguments to either side. And what they expected was they'd come closer to the middle and be able to talk. Do you know what actually happened?
They were more polarized.
They went more polarized. So if you just give someone more facts, we assume that they're going to look at it and start to evaluate it. But most of the time, depending on who it's coming from, it actually makes them believe what they believe even more. So the people pushing the narrative, they want us in these social medias having these heated debates. Yeah. If we can create the debate, and that was the whole big part of the project, was how do I create a conversation between another person that we can actually start to discuss the details? Yeah, and not just throw mud at each other.
Right.
Yeah, because that's most conversations, almost high 90%, I'd say, that when you're talking to, and a lot of the time these people are intelligent. Well,
yes.
the basic intelligence, the indoctrinated, learn 100 facts intelligence, not the real thinking side. Do you see how that works, Richard?
Yeah. So if you're, I'm just trying to think of an example here. I mean, let's look at, say, the net zero concept. That yes. We've got to go to net zero, all based on this global warming that scientists have, it goes round, and the argument you get is, scientists have proved it.
Yeah.
And 97% of them have proved it. But, of course, as you start to disseminate that and look at it, you realise that's all a big load of old nonsense. And 97% percent might have shown some interest in it, but not
Might have
necessarily.
nodded.
And yes, nodded. They didn't have time to read the thing and went, "Oh well, it sounds about right," or whatever. But they've not read it.
Sign
But
it. It's for a good cause.
it's all for exactly, and then away you go. And then before you know it, as we've now seen, we've got policies based on a an idea that has been pushed. I hesitated there because I wanted to say a lie, because that's how I believe it is, but I'm staying skeptical just in case it isn't, that it is a man-made thing. But that's the narrative, and as you said, it has been so well scattered everywhere that the majority of people, although some of the policies, surely now people are beginning to go, well, this is mad, isn't it? That actually we are putting everything into, like, with everything's got to be electric.
Yeah, well,
so that
thing is,
there's a monopoly. So there's a monopoly, and then somebody else can turn it off or charge more. And actually, we've got rid of all the gas-fired stuff and all the other stuff because we've all gone electric. We're all going to suffer. I mean, surely at some point that sense must come to people and go, this is not, even if there is global warming, even if the original argument is wrong, these things that are pushing us ever more into this one power source must be bonkers.
Well, the thing is, blue flashing lights should be going off, okay, for a number of reasons. Now, the most dangerous ideologies is when there's a lot of truth in them, okay? So what I mean by this is that these morally bankrupt people have been making the stuff we buy break far quicker than it should do for decades.
Yeah.
And if you watch the light bulb conspiracy, or I think it was renamed throwaway culture, whatever it is. So if you bought a printer, the printer companies won't tell you that they had installed a chip in the printer that when it printed so many pieces of paper, it stopped working. Okay. So then you take it back to the shop and they say, oh, it's cheaper to buy a new one than fix it. So what we've just done is we've thrown away a printer that didn't need to be thrown away. And I think there was a bunch of software engineers from one country where they rewrote a program. You could download it and your printer started working again.
Right.
But it's literally industry standard now. So it's almost industry standard to be a line tow rag to build in obsolescence. Okay. So we are throwing away far more stuff than we need to. Okay. And I would say that alone is the cause of so many problems. So there is, we want to respect the earth. We want to not destroy things, wildlife, all these things. But the problem is they've taken the people that care about the earth and they've told them a lie. So then what you've got is you get this idea where you get people split and they're fighting over this stuff, but they both really kind of want the same thing, which is, well, we want to live in a nice environment. Okay. We want to be able to breathe clean air. We want to be able to do these things. But the nonsense that's being pushed to achieve that's not true. And it's being put, in my opinion, it's being pushed for control. Okay. Yes. So it's a Trojan horse. And this is the thing about hidden agendas. But the problem is, you look at and this is a controversial one, the electric versus the petrol car. What if they're both not great? Yeah. So obviously we don't want too much pollution. If you live in a street where there's cars going down all the time, it's not easy to breathe. If you go to the park, you tell the difference. But the electric car is then now socially, you get these people that's like they're royalty, aren't they? Driving an electric car, I'm better than thee. Okay. But that's what happens. They keep dividing us on these things. And once you jump into one side of the ring, you're in a fight, but you don't see who's caused the fight.
And it may be, just jumping in here, it may be that there is the third car that nobody wants you to have, which is free.
Yeah.
Free to run, costs nothing, causes no pollution, runs on water or something like that, whatever it is.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't talk about this, but I had a dinner with someone a while ago who said to me, and I had no reason to disbelieve them, that their relative had created a water-powered engine. And it was then bought by the company and put on the shelf. Okay. Right. And of course, people will argue, it's not possible. But often people say, you look at the discoveries of the last 100 years, there would have been a
Yeah.
lot of people saying that's not possible.
That's not possible.
You know?
But you take the point then that what the manipulation has done is got us arguing about petrol, diesel over electricity.
Yeah.
And we're looking at that thinking they're the only options, when
Exactly.
the other option is now sitting on the fence because nobody's introduced it, which is actually which would achieve the nice planet thing that everybody supposedly wants to create anyway.
Yeah. And that's where, hijacking movements become very powerful, because you get a lot of people with a good intention. If you can feed them a couple of things that are not true, and then they use that to get their good intention, then that's some of the most problematic. Because if people were marching in the street, we want shitty air, we want, I mean, you know what I mean? Because I think it was Chomsky said, he said the propaganda is so effective after time because you can't really push against it. So if they say, we're here to save lives, and then you go, well, you can't be against saving lives.
No.
But that's their noble lie. And that's what they do. They dress up, they polish the turd, they dress up the wolf in sheep's clothing, all these things. They do it so effectively that, look at Ocean's 11 or any movie where there's a con and a mark. Yeah. The mark might be a very intelligent person, but the con is so elaborate and everything that they see has been so taken care of to get them to see one thing another way.
Yes.
And that's what happened the last 3 years. So most people that are aware that it was nonsense know it was nonsense, but they don't know the real fine details of how it was nonsense, because when you know that, you can protect yourself and then you can call it out and all these things. So as we briefly spoke, one of the things I want to get through today was show that when you see a lot of these manipulation techniques, you can, for the most part, protect yourself against a lot of them. You then can start to call them out. You then can stop watching stuff that they're going to manipulate you and all those things. But I think we almost, when any major technologies made a mass breakthrough, we almost need to get together as a society and say, well, what are we going to do about this? Because the behavioral scientist guy, they made this huge discovery around the finer details, especially with the big data and everything else. And if this was given to the public, we could learn how to make better decisions. We could learn how to be healthier, happier, have more fun. But it's been kept by the corporations and the governments to manipulate us and sell us loads of shit we don't want. And this is the thing. If you can convince a lady in the magazines that she needs to buy a product to feel good, and the people in those magazines don't even look like that, do they? It's airbrushed and whatever. And then she's going to keep seeking to buy those products, but it's never going to scratch the itch. So she needs to buy more and more and more. Then people get into credit card debt. Then they're into the bankers, and they're the gangsters.
So I mean, what you've just outlined there, to me, is you get to a point in life where maturity catches up with you, and you start to realise actually you've been chasing fool's gold, and you don't even want the gold in the end. And I've been saying this in my show. I'd be very happy in a shepherd's hut, peering around in nature, just enjoying nature and having a very simple life without the debts, without having to go and work 9 to 5 for people who don't appreciate what I do and all of that, and not actually want much, not want what my neighbours have or what they, and we've been sold. But when you're younger, that's all around, and the advertising is saying, hey, have this lifestyle and have this, and then when you've got this, you can upgrade to this, and then you can upgrade to that, and work an extra couple of hours and upgrade to this. I mean, the other thing, when laptops came, that for me, I mean, I've always been self-employed, so I've not really had to have a laptop until relatively recently, and I very rarely use it. But I would see people on the train going to work, doing 2 hours of work as they commute, because suddenly they had that ability to do it. Whereas before they were reading a paper, peering out of the window, reading a book, possibly having a conversation with a stranger, and having a nice, reasonable commute. But now it's, I've got to get this data done, and I've got to get these emails, and they're working. So the technology is just actually
working for the machine.
Yeah. And then the mobile phones came along and you were contactable 24 bloody 7.
Which is one of the worst things ever. Now, here's the thing that's really key. And what you've touched on here is a couple of really important points, Richard. The first one is to see through the illusion. And it's not as easy as it sounds.
Right.
The second thing is to understand what they call as norms. So there's a document that I think every person in this country should read cover to cover, and it's called Mindspace. Now, you can find it. It's on the government website. It's their document of how they're going to manipulate us.
Really? That
Okay.
doesn't surprise me, because everything they have to tell you kind
Yeah.
of thing. Mindspace on the government website.
Yeah. So if you was to put in the search engine gov space Mindspace, you'll
Right,
get a
bear
copy
with
of
me.
that.
Let's have a look. Whilst you're there, I've got your website up here. There you are. I'm going to go down here. So what are we searching for? Mindspace.
Mindspace, and then put space gov.
Space. Gov.
Yeah, Mindspace, all one word.
Oh, right. It's probably going to find it anyway, but...
Yeah. There you go.
We'll
Mindspace
see.
government document. Right, there you go. Click on that.
Here we go. Look at that. Influencing behaviour through public policy. Cabinet Office. I'll leave a link in the description.
Yeah, so just scroll down a little bit. Right, there you've got there. Right, that's in the brain. There, what they've chosen are the 9 most effective ways to manipulate someone. And what they've done is the mind space, each letter represents one of those things. Okay.
Wow.
Now, what you have is that this is a dip in the ocean, this manual, because this affected, I would go to page 66.
Right, okay. Scrolling down, 57.
And a little bit of information is often a dangerous thing. So if you get say you get a civil servant finds this document, and then they suddenly work out how they can get people to act the way they want them, right? But they haven't thought about the wider consequences.
Yeah.
So look at this assumption of real intentions, right? So basically they're saying here that when the public find out, they're not going to be happy. Okay. If your attention is a temptation that government would assume that citizens' real intentions are, and so if you go into the next page, so this is, if people want to read that 66, it's really worth it. But on 67, it talks about changing people's identity. So see that?
Wow.
So you can actually change someone's identity, okay? Which is so not 100%, not all people all of the time, but it's quite easy to be misled if you're given the wrong information. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's why this document is so dangerous, because if the people pushing this don't have the best intentions, and who's going to watch the watchers? That's the key. And if it was, Seneca and Plato and all these people, I'd say, okay, but it's not so dangerous. They don't want loads of riches. They're philosophers and things like that. But these people aren't. They're paying themselves huge amounts of money. What is the guy in the ivory tower in this country worth? Like 500 million? Like, is he like, we're in this together? No, we're not. You in your yacht. We're in the rowing boat. Like, so the real key thing to understand is that for a lot of people, I consult to a lot of major finance corporations, right? And when they sit in a boardroom working out how they're going to, make more money out of screwing someone, they don't say that.
No.
They dress it up in some, we're going to deliver better value to our customer, blah, blah, blah. Like, but if they were all completely honest, I came out of one boardroom where they had the ambulance chasers in there, and what I witnessed was deplorable. So I went up to our CEO and I said, but this is like unethical. And he go, yeah, but there's a lot of money to be made. Right. And I said, well, count me out.
Yeah.
I was only contracted to them. So I was only doing like month back. So I just quit on the spot. I'm like, but it's so easy to go along with that. But I've always been fortunate that I've not had huge mortgages and kids and all these things.
Yes.
So it's much easier for me than it would be if you've got 4 kids and a big mortgage and all these things. It's so easy to move an inch. But before you know it, you've moved a few foot.
Yes.
And let me ask you a question. Is it a fascist ideal to hold someone down and inject them with something they don't want in their body?
I think that would be a big yes there.
How many
I don't think one needs to think about that one.
How many people in this country, whether they admit it openly or not, supported that if they thought that would protect them?
Yeah.
Challenging question, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But would any of those people admit that they believed in fascist ideals?
No, they wouldn't, would they? But people were saying, people were saying, leave the country if you don't get this, you
There
know,
was
or you deserve to die. I mean, people were saying that.
there were people standing. I got pictures of people standing on the corner with the board saying "Kill the unvaccinated." Even
Yeah.
Noam Chomsky showed his true colors, right? Everyone thought this guy's a legend in, propaganda, showing people. He made the documentary Informed Consent, all these things. We made incredible quotations, and all of a sudden he's recorded saying the unvaccinated should be excluded from society. You've got Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, screw your freedom. So the interesting thing about the last 3 years, and there are a few people that have come out now and said they were wrong, yeah, and you've got to admire that.
Yes,
At the same
absolutely.
time, and Bob Moran points it out, well, did people die because of that advice? So and the best propaganda is when you put people in shitty situations where, it's really difficult to get out of. But what the last 3 years did, a lot of people, and they say, it showed who my true friends are and all that, but it showed who the strong, courageous ones are. And I think it's always a responsibility of people that can see a light to find a way to lead the people that can't. Because predominantly, people do have good intentions. We're easily misled as a species, much more than we think. And then when you can lead the majority to do stupid things, you end up in madness. You see how, and this is why, they love this kind of thing, because you have the public fighting each other, missing who the real enemy is.
Yes. And as you said earlier on in the conversation, and I've mentioned this in some of the talks that I go to where people ask me to come and talk to them, and I've said, it seems to me now we're in a point where we're all on this side, and yet we're starting to argue about very small things and not the bigger picture, and who is actually responsible for the big manipulations and how our lives are changing.
Absolutely right. Now, I think that's probably a good point to point out the number one, and it's in that document, the Mindspace document, the number one manipulation, in my opinion, and the biggest elephant in the room are our emotions. Okay? Because if we can be made to feel extremely angry, we're not going to see things clearly. If we are then made to feel huge amounts of hatred, okay, we have moved away from our natural state. Yeah. And then we start attacking each other. So I've had people on my social media accounts who literally agree with most of the things I say. And I'll post something about, say, pesticides, and then they start having a go. And I'm like, what, you want poison on your food? Like, it doesn't make any sense, but I can understand they're angry. And there's people that get...
Well, what would they say then if you're saying, I mean, it seems a clear cut to me. It seems a clear cut thing. Why would you want pesticides?
And then they say, well, you're going out in the street breathing all the fumes. You don't worry about that. Being anxious about these things are more problematic. But I'm like, well, I'm not anxious. I'm just pointing out that if you eat organic food, you've got less chemicals, then you support the true farmers. Because the supermarkets, do the supermarkets care for you? Oh, yes, right. If they cared for you, why would they inject shitload of water in the chicken and make it weigh more to charge you more? Like, see, what I guess probably one of the points to make is that the situation affects people's behavior more than the person's personality at large. Not always, and about 10 or 15% of people can resist any situation, and they're the people that know what's going on, because no amount of persuasion, manipulation, anything got them to do something they didn't want to do. Okay, but you're rare if you could see through it all. So to criticize people that can't see through it all might be true, but is it practical? You know what I mean? So a lot of the things where people say to me, oh, that guy's a complete sheep. I'm like, well, yeah, but don't you want to reach him? Calling him a sheep. Like, if you say to someone, you're a complete idiot, you can't see this, that's not going to it's not going to win you friends and influence people, as the book. But I think when people understand these things, but that thing about the situation, if you put people into a situation where you put loads of pressures where they need money, then you give them the threat of not having money, you're going to apply a lot of pressures to them not acting in the most honest way.
Yeah. And we've seen these experiments that go on and say there's just a trial, like with the Oxford 20-mile-an-hour thing.
Yeah.
Or in Wales, I believe they're now they've got volunteers in Wales and Scotland. I can't remember exactly, where they're trialing giving people a universal income.
Oh yeah.
And then of course we could take that away at any minute. It's like, Oh, well, that's...
Yeah, but you see, the thing is, on the face of it,
It sounds good, doesn't
it
it?
does. And you see, that's the thing that people miss. The
What could possibly go wrong if
Yeah,
we
what
give you
could
£2 a month, you know?
exactly? Yeah,
Except we might put all the prices up, so that £2 a month means nothing.
yeah,
Or
and
we
then
could stop it at any time.
yeah, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to stop your money. Like
And
that.
then you've got no skills because you've got no job to suddenly do because you've just suddenly... Because that's the other thing people do is they spend to their income level.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, it's always that next day.
Yeah,
Everything's next
tomorrow,
day,
isn't it? Yeah,
yeah, the tomorrow.
we actually talk about that. It's the tomorrow effect. And of course, if you can make someone see this, there's so many solutions, by the way, which we probably don't have time to go into a lot of them.
Well, I was going to say we're coming up to
Yeah.
an hour, so we may have to get you back for the solutions episode.
Yeah, well, I did a podcast yesterday, and we didn't look at the time. We went for 4 hours.
Oh my goodness!
So,
yeah,
what I would say to everyone is that a lot of this information is available free. You know, when you read Mindspace, you then increase your knowledge substantially. You know, we got loads of free videos. We do run workshops and stuff, but we want to try and make everything accessible, like we're like. So, I can buy a book on something and then read it, or I can pay someone to do it for me. Whatever suits the person. That's when it's fairness. I think that's what's missing. I think that's the thing that drives me a lot of the time, because it's knowing how to manipulate people is a double-edged sword. It gives you responsibility, but if you've got good ethics, then you don't do anything because a lot of this originally was from therapy. So you're literally looking to help someone talk themselves out or fix something, but then it went into marketing, and that's disastrous because and if we touch on, but it just finished with the comedy aspect.
Oh yeah.
When I mentioned, so if you want to tell, it was Oscar Wilde that said, if you want to tell someone the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they kill you.
Right.
Okay. Because comedy, and this is why pretty much all dictator regimes don't want comedy and they don't want love.
Yeah. I must do more comedy on my monologues.
Funny.
It's something somebody keeps telling me. People tell me. I love it when you're doing your comic stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get a bit too serious on them, and it is the ones that I make people laugh, or I exaggerate a bit on the situation so that people can see it and they're laughing at it and going, "That's so true, isn't it?"
Yeah. That's what comedy does, because it lowers the resistance. But look at the court jester. That was created because no one could tell the king the truth but the jester, because he had to make him laugh in doing it. Because when you're in the laugh, all the chemicals, it's really good for like memory and other things, but you can literally talk about things in comedy that you often couldn't talk about in a serious conversation.
Yes.
And
I make my talks full of I mean, I have stood in front of the audience, and sometimes I've said something like, "Isn't it funny how you build it up?" And I would throw in something. I did this at one, and I just said, "Oh, isn't it funny how we've all almost pretty much agreed that we're just all going to commit suicide by agreeing with the government and what have you?" And everybody laughed, and then we all looked at each other. We said, hang on a minute, that actually it's quite serious. We've all just basically acquiesced to have something that's untested, that's never been used by any other thing, and we're giving it to pregnant women and all the rest of it. And isn't that hilarious? And everyone's sort of laughing along with me at I can't think of the word, the stupidity of it. Yeah. And then we realised, well, actually, no, we have done that, and that's incredibly serious, and what stupid people we've just been.
Yeah, well, comedy is a communication channel, but it's one that you can get a lot of information in that you wouldn't normally be able to get in there. And of course, when you look at, if you want to see it used in a bad way, watch the Stephen Colbert vaccine, like SCENE.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's like watching a cult indoctrination video. It is like, if you can watch it for 5 minutes without throwing up, like, that's an achievement. But they're using comedy to basically install these ideas, and once you know what they're like, how bad the idea is, then you shut off.
Yeah.
But that's why comedy is very powerful. We made a show, David, where we were trying to get 2-3 minute videos across with some key information. I did one actually the other day where David pretended to be the person leading the COVID inquiry, and then I was playing a behaviour scientist, showing him how to lie through his teeth without lying through his teeth. Just to show, and then it allows me to show how they do it. Because if you see the magic trick, you often go, well, that's no longer magic. I can see what they're doing. The person isn't being cut in half, or they didn't just make a rabbit appear. Yes. So that's really
there's the sleight of hand.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, it's been great talking to you, Richard. I do think that you're having a big effect in what you're doing, and if it's not enjoyable, people don't want to do it as much.
No, and people won't watch. I mean, it's been fascinating talking to you. And will you come back with solutions?
Absolutely, and I can. Give
and I'm not talking about solutions that you inject either. I'm not
well,
talking
if it was only a saline solution, it wouldn't.
Well,
be
that's it. Yeah, it wouldn't be so bad.
Boom, boom.
But people can find you at your website, which is reachingpeople.net.
Yes.
I will put the link in the description. I'll also put that Mindspace thing in the link as well, so people can go and have a read of that and see how they're being manipulated by their nice, kind, benevolent, philanthropic government that loves us so much and has these wonderful anti-human policies. Aren't they kind? Aren't they lovely?
Absolutely.
And we just acquiesce and go along with it and drive like it. I mean, when I came into Oxford to the thing that we were both at, and we drove in for the first time, because down in Worthing we still drive at 30 miles an hour, and you went in on these big wide roads that you expect to be 40, let alone 20, and it was 20. And I said to Julia as we're driving in the back, I said, suddenly we're in a milk float. What? We're in an old-fashioned milk float. We're going like this and looking at other people. Just it was like you'd slowed the film down.
But the irony was, I came in the heavy fog and I couldn't see 12 foot, so I had to go 20.
Right, there you go.
But it was really uncomfortable.
And the thing is, if you took away all those bloody signs anyway, and you didn't have speed limits, and I think they did do this as a test somewhere.
Yeah, and it was much safer.
People drive more safely because suddenly they're concerned that whatever. And I did a video this morning about what if we don't have insurance and you actually had to pay for it. You'd probably drive a lot more safely, because if you're responsible for bashing into somebody, you're going to drive a lot more carefully than thinking, some insurance company.
Yeah. Don't you love it when they say, if you have an accident, we'll pay for you? No, I'll pay increased premiums next year.
Yes.
They never paid.
No, of course they don't. David, excellent. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard,
for telling us how we've been manipulated.
Yeah, and we dipped our toe into it.
We did. We only did, as you say. We've got 4-hour. Are those 4-hour podcasts on your webpage?
It was with Ahmed Malik, so he'll be on his when he releases.
Oh, right, there we go.
Yeah,
face to face.
It was. Yeah. I went down there on the way back from the event we were at. And he said, it's just like having a conversation at the pub. And it was. We didn't notice the time. And I'm like, he goes, we broke the record. But it's a fascinating subject. And it really, here's the thing, it's empowering. Yeah. When we get empowered and we don't fall for the con tricks anymore, they can't sell it to anyone. And then they've got no buyers. And then the whole thing's not supported.
Yeah. Well, we'll get you back for more for part 2 in a few weeks' time, perhaps after Christmas or something. It would be great. Wonderful. There we are. David from reachingpeople.net. Links in the description. I'll be back with more monologues, etc. But from David and I, thank you for watching. Till next time. Goodbye.